Hello, football fans. It's the NFL Exporter checking in February 2015. I'd like to thank everyone for joining the show. Before the 2014 season got started, I had an opportunity to weigh in on each division, giving in-depth analysis and breaking down each team, looking at their potential prospects for the season. And now that the season is officially over, let's take a look at how each team fared in contrast to my outlook and predictions for them, and we're going to get things started in the NFC East division. The Dallas Cowboys won the NFC East division with a 12-4 record. I had the Cowboys as an 8-8 team before the season started, so obviously they finished well above what I expected from them. When you look at the Dallas Cowboys and what they were able to do on the offensive side of the football, it was much different than the Cowboys team that we had seen in past years. Everything really got going on the ground. Running back DeMarco Murray led the NFL with 1,845 rushing yards and 13 TDs. If it wasn't for a late season injury, which really kind of limited him in a late season game against the Indianapolis Colts, I really think DeMarco Murray would have made a legitimate push to get 2,000 yards. Nonetheless, it was Dallas's ground game that really opened up the door for Dallas to have the fantastic season that they did. In the past, we had become accustomed to seeing the Cowboys run the ball some, but they were a team who wanted to pass the football a lot. Well, this year, they went out and made a great first-round draft pick, and offensive lineman Zach Martin really came in and helped solidify an outstanding Cowboys offensive line that is now coming into the 2015 season going to be considered the best in the NFL. And certainly when you look at what DeMarco Murray and that running game was able to do, it took a whole lot of pressure off the team as a whole. Quarterback Tony Romo was much more efficient of a passer, being able to take advantage of one-on-one matchups outside when teams stacked the box. He was also able to utilize play-action pass, and it really took a lot of pressure off Romo, who didn't really have to do everything through the air. And then also when you look at what it did for the Dallas Cowboys defense, allowing that unit to get much more rest than they've gotten in past years. And for a change, the Dallas Cowboys defense was able to play some games from ahead. Moving back over to the offensive side of the football, when you look at Tony Romo, it was another outstanding year for Romo. I don't think there's any question. Tony Romo has solidified himself as an elite quarterback in the NFL when you're talking about the regular season. Right now, Tony Romo has the enviable task now of just trying to move the Cowboys much further along in the playoffs, but he did a great job, as we've accustomed to see him do in the regular season, throwing for over 3,200 yards, throwing for over 30 touchdowns, single digits in interceptions. You certainly love to see that from Tony Romo, a guy who kind of had a history of the past of being someone who was always turning the football over at the most important times in the football game. Certainly did not make those mistakes this year. Really only had one bad game, and it was just a bad game for Dallas as a whole, and that was at home against Philadelphia. You look at the wide receiving core that Dallas brought to the table. Excellent group there, starting with Dez Bryant. Certainly has solidified himself as one of the top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. Led all receivers this year in receiving touchdowns with 13. Had well over 1,300 yards, and is just really making his mark as being one of the premier pass catchers in the NFL. Second-year guy Terrence Williams continues to excel. Certainly had some big games down the stretch. Is a perfect complement to Dez Bryant at the number 2 receiver. You also look at the slot receiver Cole Beasley. Certainly made some nice contributions to this offense as well. And then steady as they come, we're talking about tight end Jason Witten, always there. Really dedicated himself to blocking. He's a veteran in his career. Really wants to try to get to that elusive Super Bowl. But when the games were on the line and the money counted, especially down the stretch, Jason Witten continued to be an excellent passing or receiving option, I should say, for Tony Romo and the Cowboys offense. When you look at the defensive side of the football for Dallas, this was a unit coming into the season that was highly regarded as one of the worst defenses in the NFL. But when you take a look at what Rod Marinelli was able to do, and I think you're seeing a unit here that was able to play solid for the most part, come up with some timely turnovers and timely stops, and again having an offense that's churning the football out on the ground, really allowing that unit to stay fresh. And then obviously when you're playing ahead in football games, allows your defense to be a little bit more aggressive as the play calling is a little bit more predictable. Nonetheless, Dallas did suffer some pretty bad injuries, losing before the season inside linebacker Sean Lee, also losing defensive back Morris Claiborne. And so they had a couple holes to fill, but for the most part, the Dallas Cowboys defense was able to hold things intact. When you look at the Dallas Cowboys coming back for 2015, obviously trying to re-sign DeMarco Murray and Dez Bryant are at the top of their list, but if they can keep this team together, I certainly expect them to be contending for a Super Bowl yet again this year. We all know the Dallas Cowboys made it to the divisional round, playing against the Green Bay Packers, had a very controversial call that pretty much ended their season when wide receiver Dez Bryant, he had a catch or what looked like a catch. Unfortunately, the referees, due to the letter of the law, overruled that play. Dallas essentially lost that game. They had some other opportunities. I really feel like, again, if they can keep these guys together, this will be a team playing with a chip on their shoulder with revenge in mind. Moving over to the next team in the division, you had the Philadelphia Eagles coming in at 10-6, and that certainly was a disappointment. I thought that the Eagles myself would repeat as division winners. When you pretty much looked at what happened in Philadelphia this year, it really was a case of this team just dropping the ball and not tightening up the areas that I thought they would the all season. Now, halfway through the season, starting quarterback Nick Foles, who was playing pretty well, certainly wasn't playing at that elite level that we seen the year before, and we all knew that there was no way he was going to duplicate 27 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions throughout the course of the year. But he was playing well enough. But really, the Eagles' offense got hurt by offensive line injuries. This was a unit coming into this season who certainly was in the top 5 offensive linemen. When you think about Pro Bowlers like Jason Peters and Todd Jimenez, center Travis Kelce, guys like that. You're talking about guard Evan Mathis. When the season started, from the very first game, they were already playing without starting tackle Lane Johnson. In that game, his backup got injured for the year, as well as guard Evan Mathis went down for an extended period of time. A couple games later, they had their starting center Travis Kelce go down. So running the football, which is something obviously when you have a running back like Shady McCoy, you're able to do effectively. Both the offensive line being so banged up, the holes that were there for Philadelphia last year in the running game weren't being produced, and also the protection wasn't there. So you had some stability issues on the front lines. Nonetheless, LaShawn McCoy had another great year. I know by many people's standards it was below average. And yes, from a touchdown scoring standpoint and his ability to catch the football out of the backfield, those 2 elements obviously were mentioned. But McCoy still rushing for over 1,300 yards. It was really the newcomer Darren Sproles coming over to the team, cutting into a little bit of McCoy's production when you're talking about some goal line touchdowns and catching the football out of the backfield. But I think in the long run, it's something that definitely would have had McCoy a lot fresher had Philadelphia made the playoffs. When you look at the wide receiver position, Jeremy Maclin was able to come in and do an outstanding job for the departed Deshaun Jackson, who led the team the year before with 82 catches, 1,332 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Maclin was able to come in and pretty much duplicate those numbers. 90 catches on the year, up over 1,200 yards, did have 10 TD receptions, but you've seen his production slow down a tad bit once Mark Sanchez came in for the injured Nick Foles and took over at the quarterback position. But that allowed for the emergence of rookie wide receiver Jordan Matthews, who was a nice addition to this team. We all know that this year's rookie class at the wide receiver position was unrivaled like we had seen in a very long time. Matthews had a very effective rookie campaign himself with over 700 receiving yards and 8 receiving TDs. I think the guy that you've seen that was missing and we had a lot more expectation from, and that was tight end Zach Ertz. Sure, he was sharing some playing time with fellow tight end Brent Selleck, but really didn't make the impact that we expected. When you look on the defensive side of the football, Philadelphia's front seven certainly was a very aggressive and active group, doing a good job at limiting teams against the run, as well as being able to get some pressure on the quarterback. But when you look at the Eagles secondary, it's a unit that really has continued to struggle. That was an area that I thought that they would really address in the offseason. Yes, they did bring in safety Malcolm Jenkins from the New Orleans Saints, a guy who did get out there and make some plays. But when you look at the Eagles secondary as a unit, just not strong enough, amongst the worst in the NFL. And so the thing that really sealed Philadelphia's fate was a horrible late season loss at Washington. They lost control of their own destiny at that point and just were unable to make it in. And so a 10-6 record is good, but the Eagles were not able to repeat as division champions. I think in the offseason, they certainly got their work cut out trying to figure out their quarterback situation. I honestly believe that Nick Foles is still going to be the guy, but they've got to concentrate on getting that secondary together. If they can do that, this is certainly a team that's going to be contending for that division title again this year with the Dallas Cowboys. Next, you have the New York Giants coming in at 6-10. A very tough year for the New York Giants. This is a unit starting back in the preseason. You could really see the woes. You had a brand new offensive coordinator who brought a brand new offensive playbook to the table, which everybody had to learn over again. You looked at Eli Manning. He was working with a brand new set of weapons. No longer was it Hakeem Nicks. No longer was it Mario Manningham. No longer was it Ahmad Bradshaw, Brandon Jacobs. These players we had become accustomed to seeing Eli Manning rely on and help the Giants win some Super Bowls over the past couple years. Now enter into the equation. You had some new receivers that you were working with. To make matters worse, Victor Cruz went down with a injury very early on in the season. And so it was a learning process. The Giants got off to an 0-3 start. And then they were able to win 3 straight games, and then from there went on a very bad losing streak before winning 2 out of their last 3 games to complete the season. I think all in all, the Giants did have some bright spots, certainly popped through for them, and particularly Offensive Rookie of the Year, Odell Beckham Jr. was absolutely outstanding this year. In only 12 games, 1,305 yards, 13 TDs, made the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Very electrifying player. And then you also like running back Andre Williams from Boston College did a very good job coming in backup duty and filling in for free agent pickup Rashard Jennings, who looked very good but continues to be injury prone, something that has riddled him throughout the course of his career. When you look at the Giants offense as a whole, sure, Ruben Randle was there. He did a great job coming on late. Too late in the season. He was someone that certainly New York was trying to rely on in the absence of Victor Cruz. The offensive line certainly is another area where you've seen the Giants really struggling. When you look at the Giants defense, a unit that inconsistencies really marred them throughout the course of the season. Unable to get a steady pass rush, some difficulty stopping the run, and their secondary getting banged up, and particularly their 2 free agent pickups. We're talking about Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie and Walter Thurman. Both of those guys had played for Seattle and Denver respectively last year in the Super Bowl. Coming over this year, Thurman lost early in the season due to an injury. Rodgers-Cromartie battled, hampered up by injuries the second half of the year. So the unit not able to be as stable as they would like to be. I think all things considered, when you look at the Giants coming into this season, if it's a unit that can stay healthy and they bring back all their pieces, obviously on the offensive side of the football, they're stacked up at the skill position. You still have Eli Manning at quarterback. You have 2 reliable running backs in Andre Williams, who we expect to be better in his second year, and Rashard Jennings. You have 3 legitimate wide receivers in Odell Beckham Jr., Ruben Randle, as well as Victor Cruz returning. Hopefully he can get back to full strength after that ACL tear. And then you have a good tight end in Larry Donald. So I think shoring up that offensive line certainly needs to be the main focus for the Giants. As for their defense, a little bit more needs to be done on that side of the ball. They've got to find a way to get a pass rush. We're certainly looking for Jason Pierre-Paul to get back into Pro Bowl form. They've got to address the linebacker position. John Beeson is a guy who's been very injury prone in New York the last couple of years. He's on his last leg. And if their secondary is healthy, I certainly like Walter Thurman and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie at defensive back. They certainly could use another good safety alongside Pro Bowler Antrell Rolle. And they've got to get some depth back there. Prince Amukamara is a guy who's certainly shown that he's unable to stay healthy as well. Rounding out the division, it was the Washington Redskins at 4-12. Tumultuous year for first year head coach Jay Gruden coming over for the Cincinnati Bengals. This was a team on paper offensively coming into the season. You thought, boy, this was going to be a very exciting group to watch. You're figuring Jay Gruden had done a lot of good things with that offense over in Cincinnati. You looked at the pieces that were in place. A healthy Robert Griffith III at wide receiver. You had Pierre Garçon, who had over 100 catches for 1,300 yards the year before. You brought over free agent Deshaun Jackson, over 1,300 yards, 9 TDs the year before from Philadelphia. You had a nice young tight end in Jordan Reed and an effective running back in Alfred Morris, who had over 2,800 yards rushing in his first 2 years, along with a pretty good offensive line. But things got going downhill early. Robert Griffith III ended up breaking or dislocating his ankle in the second game of the season, and it was pretty much all downhill from there. The Redskins offense, very inconsistent, not running the football as effectively as we've seen in the past. And really, when you're dealing with backup quarterbacks, you had a guy like Kirk Cousins come in, able to throw for a lot of yards, but just really unable to win football games. That was the biggest thing that you've seen, was nothing adding up in the win column, and it just became a situation where a lot of frustration, the media became involved, the locker room murmuring. It just really was something that was difficult for a first-year coach to handle. And then when you look on the defensive side of the football, yes, the Redskins were one of the better teams in the NFL at stopping the run. You like some guys they had up front, bringing over a free agent Jason Hatcher to be in the trenches on the front line, Ryan Kerrigan, Brian Arakpo, but Arakpo continues to be an injury concern. Hatcher got a little bit nicked up. Again, nonetheless, Redskins solid against the run, but that secondary is of the utmost concern. They have some guys back there at safety and veteran Ryan Clark and Brandon Merriweather who flat out can't cover anybody. Their defensive backs are very weak. That's an area they're thin at there. They had a second-year guy in Dave Emerson. The really guy, the steadiest that they had was D'Angelo Hall, the veteran who went down with an Achilles injury early in the season, and he was gone for the year. And so that certainly is an area that Washington is going to need to address with the utmost concern. All in all, for the Redskins, I think this is a group that it was a learning experience. Jay Gruden, very lucky to still have his job. He's got to find a way to get that offense on track. There's too many productive pieces there for the Redskins to be struggling the way that they did. And again, on the defensive side of the football, they've got to address their secondary with the utmost urgency.